Hey Skyfarers, and welcome to Aethercast, the Kharadron Overlords channel and podcast. Well, today we've got a cool show. We're chatting to guys that played at the Cancon Quarter Glory tournament and did really well KO. So without further ado, let's introduce our guests for tonight. We have Mr. Nathan Thompson. Welcome to the show, Nathan.
Hey, how you going?
Yeah. And Mr. Luca Foerster.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Did I pronounce your surname correctly, Luca? I wasn't quite sure with the.
Yeah, close enough. Foerster, Foerster. It's yeah.
Close enough is what I always aim for. Yeah, I was butchering surnames last week as well. Don't worry. And you love him. He's our thunderer from down under, Mr. Alexander Krohn.
Good to be back. First show of the year.
Yeah.
My first show of the year.
Yeah. And first show off for a long time.
Yeah.
It's been a little while. But it's good. Get back into the swing of things. Getting our sea legs back or air legs.
Air legs.
Air legs. Cool. So before we dive into the tournament and talk about everything, there is some minor news. Although I say news, it's more like rumors.
Did the battle scroll come out?
No, but there's been some purportedly leaks, but could just be made up.
Oh.
When when it all comes out and it's just like everything, and it's like all the points changes, all the FAQs, and is this real or is this something is this what somebody wants to see? So, are you ready? Drum roll. The points changes for KO apparently minus 10 points for Sky Wardens and a 10-point increase for Gunhaulers Thunderers, and that is it apparently.
No.
So
I'll take that.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean, you can see why I'm not entirely sure these are true.
Leave the bloody Thunderers alone. What have they done now?
Oh, they were touching people in places.
Engine riggers, nothing. Frigates, nothing. All that untouched.
Yeah, apparently.
Yeah. Oh wow. Okay.
I mean, if that's
seen another rumor
true, then
floating around that they were going to introduce some line of sight blocking terrain each game as well.
Yeah, I saw that one. And changing Sarathon and
they tried to
some little green text thing.
They tried to introduce line of sight blocking terrain at Cancon. Actually, there were a few pieces of it. I mean, it wasn't. It didn't necessarily block a lot of my line of sight across my games, but it was there for sure. Like there were a few pieces.
Yeah. I mean, when you can move around quite quickly,
it's impactful in a couple of my games.
I mean, in the UK, it feels like there are quite a few tournaments that do it anyway. Like people do Impassable as well and stuff. Like it's makes for more interesting games. If not, terrain can not always have that much impact.
They added garrisonable in Cancon as well. I like the garrisonable terrain.
Well, that's part of the core rules, isn't it? But sometimes people just don't say any of the terrain is garrisonable. But so it can be problematic at times if if it's just touching an objective, and then you get it's like 1 millimeter of the terrain on the objective, and you put 30 dudes in there. There can be some problems. But if you put the terrain in the correct places, garrison is quite cool. Cool.
Cancon had FAQ'd the garrison will just not count on objectives.
Yeah.
So even if it was touching, just a little, so they nixed that quite well, and it was great.
Yeah, we have that in the UK quite a bit of tournaments as well. I think it's in the Honest Wargamers tournament, like terrain rules things. So a lot of people just sort of use those. It's cool. So
garrisons are also.
Cancon. Sorry, go ahead.
I was about to say garrisons are also sort of interesting for my games because I can use them to kind of launch Gotrek forward if there's like a big garrison in the middle. you can enter it in your first turn and then disembark like 6 inches further, and you gain like the length of the terrain piece plus like 12 in, like 4 inches or so of extra free movement. Not that I ever used it, but it's always like an option,
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, because he's not fast. So that's any extra movement you can get with Gotrek is worth it. Especially with people redeploying away from him. That can be annoying. So cool. So Cancon Called Glory. It's been pretty big in the past. How many players were this year? Was there a lot?
About 180 was this year.
Yeah, about 180. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they usually try and keep it around 200. I think after drops this year. Yeah, about 180.
Yeah. Do they still do it in like a big aircraft hangar? Was that Cancon that used to do in an aircraft hangar?
Still there. Now it's a different aircraft hangar.
Different aircraft hangar, but it's still an aircraft hangar. I mean, that's home turf for KO then, basically. It's cool. Yeah, I mean, I figure there was probably quite a lot of people because the tournament after the top 8 went into eliminations for so I mean, there's quite a few tournaments seem to be doing that now. The bigger ones, I think that's quite cool. Rather than just having like 3 people and 5-0 and one person wins because they've got slightly better secondaries or strength of schedule or something. It's better to get like a proper winner.
I think they had the opportunity this year to do that because we have a public holiday that falls on a Friday, so we actually have the 3-day weekend. So they thought, let's give it a try. And Canberra's a bit out of the way for most of us, so normally that option wouldn't really be on the cards. So you'd have to take a few extra days off of work and what have you. So it was a good opportunity to trial it. I think it's the first time we've done that in Australia, to my knowledge. So it was good. Yeah,
cool. I mean, I think it's better to certainly good to get like a proper winner. And I mean, spoiler alert for what we're going to talk about a bit more in the show. But you both actually finished like the first 5 games 4-1. So I mean, if they hadn't have done that, I guess you wouldn't have podiumed at all. But then Nathan, you come out on top on the whole thing. So
yeah, I was 4 in a draw, so I think I finished 6th on score. So yeah, I wouldn't have podiumed, but yeah, we had soft scores as well, and the soft scores did count, and that rearranged the top 8 a little bit. So I think that probably helped Luca push up a little bit because there was a lot of 4-1s. And if you're a 4-1 with some decent soft scores, that put you towards the top of the pile. I think I finished 3rd overall because of soft scores, so I jumped up a few notches. So it guaranteed me a top 8, and it definitely helped. If you're pushing for 4-1 and you wanted a good one, the soft scores were a big deal. So yeah,
I was going to ask about that actually because I wasn't sure if like the secondaries or whatever on stats and ladders were correct or something because it didn't look like you were in the top 8, Luca. And I was like, well, you obviously played in the knockout rounds, so something must have happened there. But now we know. So was that just painting and stuff, or was it sports and things?
Yeah, painting and sports. Yeah.
Cool.
We had a couple of people who couldn't make the top 8 either, so that sort of rolled down a little bit. But yeah,
because even though it's a public holiday, I guess some people still had work, because it's the modern world and you don't always get bank holidays in some jobs. Cool.
It was also to do with battle tactics, wasn't it? Like if you denied your opponent battle tactics, you got extra points.
Okay.
Yeah, and Grand Strat.
There was Grand Strat involved in that. Okay, yeah. So the only way to get max points, I think, was basically if you tabled your opponent as potentially turn 1, and they only achieved one of their 5 battle tactics, then you would get the maximum possible score in a game.
Yeah.
So a lot of people didn't get max scores, but yeah, they all counted towards it.
Cool. So nice, interesting stuff going on there then. So when you say denying your opponent's battle tactics, was it just if they failed, or did the players actually have to say whether you actually physically managed to do something that stopped it as opposed to them just failing it on their own.
Nah,
I think they could just fail it. Yeah.
Okay.
So you could even if they didn't have any battle tactics like left to score, if you'd wiped them out in turn 1, for example, then that would count as 4 failed, 4 denied, I suppose.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah. Okay. So if it was purely just denying it, and you actually had to, that would be quite hard to manage. But no, that's quite cool. Battle tactics are becoming a very important part of the game, really, these days, which is good for KO because we're quite good at battle tactics. Cool. So let's jump in. We're going to look at Kron's list first, and then we'll move on to, I think we're going to have Luca's afterwards, and then Nathan's sort of like. So Kron, do you want to go read it out, Kron, and explain it rather than me read it?
Sure. It's Endrin Master with Endrin Harness as the Warlord, with a Celestial Burst Grenade, Navigator with a Voidstone Orb, Thunderek with his Thunderek's Profiteers, a Lord Ordinator, and 9 Gunhaulers. No Ironclad. There shouldn't be an Ironclad.
Oh, I don't know how I've done that.
That'd be a 2,500 point army. There we go.
Yeah, it's probably a copy and paste error there.
No, just Gunhaulers. Which so it. I mean, I went 3-2. It did well against everything. It shoots its way out of everything. It can take objectives, but it can't hold objectives because it is just in the end 9 models. And the 2 games I lost were against Soulblight, where I shoot them all off, and then they put 10 skeletons on an objective back on objective, and I go, well, okay. What do you do?
Yeah.
Shoot them off. Come back. And eventually, you just get outpointed in those games. But it was fun. It was a fun list. It does the thing that surprises most people is the mortal wounds. Everyone goes, "That's a shooting list." Okay, but if you screen them out a little bit, if you have those 3 boats in the front, they hit them, then your other 6 boats can all do a bombing run on top of the units that just got caught, and does 10, 15 mortal wounds on average, which will blow up the majority of most of a unit, and then you just clear it off with your shooting, which is insane thanks to the Lord Ordinator, who makes them all. Well, if you're shooting at the grudged unit, 2s and 1 damage 2.
Yeah. Nice. So I feel like we're. Sorry, I think we've got. Go ahead, Quan, because I think we've got a bit of a delay, and I didn't realize you were going to say something.
Oh, no, that's okay. But yeah, this isn't the list we're talking about because it only went 3-2. We're here to talk about the champions.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. So I mean, if you want to move on, then I don't want to talk about it, but I mean, I feel like we're overdue talking about your list a bit, Quan, because I know you've been playing this list for a long time, and I don't think because we hadn't done a show for ages, and because it's so unique, I feel like we can spend a little bit more time on it. One thing that I know is a bit unusual. You mentioned about how good the bombing is that does actually open up that battle tactic a lot.
Yes. Yeah. There's the bombing run tactic. If you can see something with usually if it's got 5 wounds or less, I see something with 5 wounds, I go, okay, bombing run, fly 3 or 4 boats over it, and that usually gets it. We played for the people who didn't make the top 8, we did a doubles tournament where just 2 people took 1,000-point list and played 3 games against each other. I basically took half of this, 5 gunhaulers and just the navigator. Try to do the bombing run tactic against a single Black Knight with 2 wounds. I had 2 boats. I only rolled 2 4s out of 8 dice, and then he rolled a 6, and then it failed. So that was against Pat and Joel. I had the worst luck that whole game. I shot 5 boats at a 4-wound Stormcast Dragon. I did 2 wounds. and that was my opening salvo.
Oh,
Oh no!
Like all 5 boats concentrate fire, nothing. It's like hit on 3s, 2s. 2 on the 1. Reroll the 1. 1. Okay. All
harsh. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I find I don't pick opening salvo very often because I don't feel like it's particularly reliable to kill something turn 1, unless you really want to just jump down your opponent's throat straight away.
yeah, I usually go for like a surround and destroy on my like opening battle tactic actually, but you know, if they've sort of pre-game moved or you know sacrificed 10 regular mooks to the middle of the board, then you can kind of bank on it a little bit. But especially if you're running Brock, who's got good 18-inch range, so you can still kind of keep your distance, but have enough output to like take him out. But yeah, it's a little dicey sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, there's a good point about Brock because I don't have much long range shooting in the list I normally play. It's pretty much all balloon boys and things, so everything's sort of 12 inches, and then you have to get pretty close, and then if you've got a bit more long range, it is easier to do. Krohn, one last thing about this before we move on. I reckon some people at home watching will probably wondering about Thundrick and his profiteers. So do you want to explain the reasoning behind him?
That was probably an invention from Max, basically, saying so it used to just be 10 gunhaulers, but Thundrick was but what if we added an extra hero so we could do the get in the boat, get out of the boat strategy, battle tactic, which clearly helped because it's just like even the games I lost in this tournament, I did 5 battle tactics just because it's so easy to do something with KO, and Thundrick gave me that third KO unit that can get in and out of the boats, and he comes with a little unit just to help screen or capture an objective somewhere else. So I found him more useful than an admiral who is good, but a lot of his buffs relate to infantry, like giving the extra rend, and you want to make a gunhauler a flagship? That doesn't really...
I'm not sure he can even make a gunhauler flagship, can he?
You can't.
That's no. So yeah, you can't even make a gunhauler flagship. So I mean, you know, you're not getting much out of Brock then.
I mean, if I could take Brock, but I didn't have the points for Brock.
They do. Yeah, you're okay. Yeah, Brock would be.
It's worth pointing out Thundrick's 4 models. That's why you can get him in the boat. So you got Thundrick, his unit, and another hero. So that's the 6 models. So,
yeah.
It's
sometimes you have.
Handy. I played a similar list for a bit after I saw Krohn took this list to a teams tournament and had a bit of fun with it. And it's that little gunhauler running around scoring battle tactics all game is quite obscene. Yeah. It's great.
It seems like this is the kind of. Sorry, I was just going to say, like, this seems like the kind of list you would write when you kind of first pass through the book and you notice like gunhaulers, battle line, and Barak Urbaz, and you're like, oh, what if I just take only this? And then you look at the Stormcast and you're like, oh, and I take this ally. Yeah, it seems like a cracking list. I've always wanted to give it a go.
It was mostly also the fact, like, basically the amount of like start collectings or like KO box kits where you get units and a gunhauler. I had like 7 of the things. I was like, we need to buy like 2 more of these. I could do this. If I just built and painted all of these, I got a ton. So shove them all in, ordinate in the middle. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you make a nice little like strike squad if you get the Endon Master Thundrick and his Profiteers as like your 6 models. That goes and it can pretty like it can jump behind the enemy and 3d6 charge and hit some of their like a ghoul hero a ghoul wizard at one point. Like just charged him in his throne, took him out. Some kind of suicide squad. It was good.
That's great.
The mortal wound ability on Thundrick's not too bad either. That's a good little ability.
Yeah. Yeah, just like, you choose the right moment, and there's a lot of stuff around him. Cool. So the thing with Thundrick Profiteers is they're only 160 points. So it's really cheap to get 2 units because the cheapest hero is 90 points. So you can't in this list you couldn't actually get those 3 units any other way. So cool. Krohn, am I right to assume that quite often you're spending a CP for the Ordinator to run?
Yeah, he just just 11 inches forward every turn, basically. Or for the first couple of turns, then they usually find like the middle point and just stays in the middle of that big bubble, the big castle.
Yeah. Cool. Right. So should we move on and have a look at Luca's list? Before we do, we're getting a bit of an echo from somewhere. Don't know where it's coming from. I'm just going to try muting people one by one. Are we still getting it?
It's probably me.
Here we are. We're getting it now. No, Luca, I think it must be you.
Oh dear, okay.
Is the sound definitely coming through your headphones?
Maybe. Let me just go into settings and see if I can fix that. I've got echo cancellation on. If I were just to turn my volume down, maybe what's happening is that like I've got the volume on quite loud, and maybe like the mic is picking up the speaking. Yeah. Is that fixing it at all if I just turn it down?
I think so. Yeah, that's better.
Okay, yeah. Nice.
Yeah. Cool. Right, so let's have a look at your list then, Luca. So yeah, you went 4-1 with this. Barak Nar, 1990 points and 2 drops. So you have as your general an Endra Master on foot with Stormcaller and an Oldstone icon, a Navigator with Voidstone Orb, Brock Grunson, and as you mentioned earlier, Gotrek. And then 3 units of 10 Arcanauts, 9 Endriggers, a Gunhauler, and a Frigate, and everything is in a battle regiment except for Gotrek. So it's kind of one big threat with the Frigate, and then a second big threat with Gotrek.
Yeah, that's essentially right. So I started playing with 9 engine riggers, and I just found that their output was pretty phenomenal just with the riggers alone. And I kind of kept thinking about how you can make them better, and how you can kind of enable them. And I kind of found that so last year I went to a tournament and I was running 9 engine riggers and a frigate, and then 10 thunderers and an ironclad. I was running them both. But I kept finding I put all my command point resources into the 9 engine riggers over the 10 thunderers. So they just kept putting in more work than the 10 thunderers. So I just kept thinking to myself, what if I just sort of ignored the 10 thunderers and put them, reallocated their points to something else, and just sort of made the list about those engine riggers and the frigate. And so I was reading through the book, and I noticed that Brock has that +1 attack aura. And so suddenly you have a unit of 9 engine riggers with 28 attacks that do D3 damage in the charge. And that's a really nasty little threat right there. So, in order to have the 9 engine riggers in one block, you need to have the engine master on foot. You could do the balloon engine master if I wanted to, but, the one on foot for 90 points, you get, 6 wounds and a 3-up save. So he's actually, I think he's good value for 90 points. He does a bit, he's got quite a bit of damage on his hammer swings. He heals the boats, and he's just sort of pretty tough himself. So, I think he was a pretty good unit to run as well. And I just had one from the start collecting box. So it's sort of the reason why I take Barak Nar, of course, is for Brock and the engine riggers, but also because Barak Nar is the only subfaction that kind of helps Gotrek. Every other subfaction only affects Skyfarer's units, but with Barak Nar, because you're just getting command points, you can use those on Gotrek to run him up the board, or you can use him any which way you want. And really, command points are sort of the lifeblood of KO. You really need them to enable your units to, teleport around, to make big charges, to, get the most value out of your big units. So having more command points is really useful, especially on those turns where you're made to go first, or you choose to go first, and you only get 2 from this scenario. rolling 3 dice and getting even just 1 more or 2 more is a real game changer, I find. The Etheric Navigator, is in there because he's a staple in KO lists. He enables the whole play style, right? You half move the scary things, and then you shoot and charge everything else. And also giving him the Voidstone Orb is almost mandatory, I think, because in a world where blizzards can knock out your ships in one go or knock out your important units in one go, you just need that insurance there to like knock it out. And if you kind of deploy aggressively with the Navigator, you can also sort of like push out your opponent's heroes back, because everyone loves to score magical dominance on turn 1. So if you're sort of aggressive with the positioning of your Navigator, even if you put them out of the ship, you can kind of push their heroes back against their back line almost sometimes. And that creates a lot of extra space between you and them. But yeah, again, really it's just that hero phase ability to half move units or bump your ships around as you need. It's incredible flexibility. And take Brock Grunson. He's just a fantastic unit. He's just 220 points of raw value. He's a sort of a simple war scroll. I rarely used his like run, shoot, charge ability on the ships. Mostly he's just there to like give the +1 attack, and his shooting profile is really quite good. He's got the output of a gunhauler. He's got almost the output of a frigate, like if you do the maths, because his attacks hit on 3s. So that big cannon hitting on 3s typically works out the same as like 2 cannon shots hitting on 4s. So, him plus a frigate is about 500 points, and their output is more than the Ironclad at 500 points. So sort of like, that's the comparison I like to make in list building. And 8 wounds and a 3-up is fairly resilient, especially when you have him in the ship, like I like to do most of the time. And then, on top of his shooting, he's got combat. So he's got 5 attacks on the charge, D3 damage each again. And then he's also got mortal wounds on top of that. So suddenly, he's just doing all of these different things, and he's opening up long range shooting, opening salvo is an easier tactic to score with him. He's opening up, massive charge bombs. And you can send them out on his own to like go and deal with problems here, there, and elsewhere as well in the late game. So yeah, he's definitely an integral part of the list. So then I've got 3 units of 10 Arcanauts. They're really there for screening objectives, just running around the board doing tactics. I could have put 2 units of 10 Arcanauts into 1 unit of 20 to squeeze everything to a single drop. But I liked having 3 units of 10 separately just for the flexibility. I tended to find that my Arcanauts live a fairly like binary existence. They're either alive on 10 wounds or they've been completely wiped off the face of the earth. And so by putting 2 units of 10 into a unit of 20, it just makes it easier for them to get wiped off the face of the earth, So typically the way I deploy is I'd like to have the frigate sort of in the middle with 10 Arcanauts in the front and then Gotrek in the middle. So sort of that cluster in the middle. Then I have 2 units of 10 Arcanauts on either side of the board, so I could do in turn 1 surround and destroy, and so they can go and contest like the sort of outer objectives as well. And yeah, just having 3 units of 10 gives me that flexibility to do so. It lets me sort of trade a little bit easier on objectives and whatnot. And then the gunhaul is there for the grand strategy insurance. It's really useful for battle tactics too, especially in those deployments where you can't easily get a unit of Arcanauts into the other table side for surround and destroy. It can score that on its own. It can run off and take objectives. I mean, in one game, it won me a game against Gits when it charged to Gits on an objective, and I used my 3 to 6 inch charge on the gunhauler, and with its 4 attacks, 4s and 4s, I managed to kill 1 grot, which was enough to help me get the objective over. Yeah, it's just a grand strat insurance. Like it won me my game against the game I won in the top 8 rounds against Seraphon, because the frigate had been taken out, but the gunhauler was still alive, and then I got the extra 3 points for the grand strat that poked me over my opponent's score. So yeah, gunhauler is just like, I feel like if you're gonna run Rule Disguise, you should be running 2 ships at minimum. Like you should be running either 1 big ship and a gunhauler, or like 2 frigates, whatever composition you like. But yeah, you typically want to run two ships just for that insurance, And then of course, you've got Gotrek there. He's sort of the man of the show. He lets us play the primary. He lets us bully the middle. he opens up a sort of play style for KO that you don't typically get otherwise. And he has this sort of like, pardon my French, he's got this sort of fuck off zone around him, right? You run him 10 inches into the middle of the board, and then suddenly nobody wants to be within a certain range of him. And that means you control that bit of the board. I've had games where like I put him in the middle, and then people's armies sort of flood around him, like almost like water in a river, like they flood like around him, just keep away, which then better enables me to like pick off one half of their army and then work my way to the next. So it's a really interesting piece. In Cancon, frankly, like most games, he never really saw combat. In my first game, he got, just annihilated by like 9 crypt horrors with like 60 attacks or something. In another game, he got, taken out by 10, fighty snakes and daughters of Cain. And then another game, he never made combat. And then in my 5th game, he also never made combat. But just that board presence and that threat is really useful. And also, he just is a completely self-sufficient piece. You only need to use 1 or 2 command points on him just to run him into the middle of the board. And then after that, you don't need to invest any resources into him. He just does what he does. And if they have like some, sorry.
Would you use heroic actions on him just to heal him up?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, heroic recovery is an amazing heroic action on him, because every wound that you heal is like, I think like what is that, 60 points worth of wounds that you get. So if you roll like a 3 on your D3, that's 180 points worth of wounds that you just get back for something that's essentially like almost free, frankly. So yeah,
and that's where Barak Nar is good too, because you got so many CP, you don't need to roll for that CP heroic action a lot of the time.
Yeah.
So you're not missing. It's not like which one do I go for? It's I've got plenty of CP already. Let's give it up.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the advantages having one frigate with 9 engine riggers, you're only using CPs on that package. So you're not like using a CP to run, shoot, charge one of your ships, and then another CP to teleport another boat, and then another CP here for that. All your CPs go into that package of engine riggers. And so you get that sort of economies of scale with them. If you put an all-out attack on your engine riggers, that's a lot of value. And if you do a rally with them, that's also a lot of value you're getting back. So the list has interesting, like a perceptive amount of sustain just from heroic actions, engine rigger healing, and also 4+ rallies. Like you're getting a surprising number of models back every game if you do use your rallies and whatnot. But yeah, so that's essentially sort of how the list works. That's all the decision points. Like, I could have squeezed an admiral in there if I'd cut some other stuff, but I felt that Barak Nar compensated for the lack of admiral through command points, and Brock was sort of more useful than an admiral. Like even that extra 80 points, it was more useful to use that in Brock. But yeah, so I've been kind of pushing this list around for a couple tournaments now. I just really like the way it plays. I think it's a lot of fun. You have something kind of silly in the middle with Gotrek, and you can do clever things like because he benefits from lookout. So there was one game where there was a piece of cover terrain in my side of the board. My opponent had 10 bow snakes. So what I would do is I would just hide 10 Arcanauts inside the cover terrain, and then put Gotrek 3 inches in front of the piece of terrain. And so suddenly you can't target the Arcanauts inside the terrain because they cover. And then you can't target Gotrek because he's got lookout. So, and you can kind of like do clever things with terrain with him. You can jump him through garrisons if that's an option. You can fight things. And so, yeah, it's just a very fun unit to use. And it just, you can just take something and just stomp it forward, and you don't really have to think too much about him, fun list. And yeah, I'm just going to keep pushing it around. I think if we, as you say, with the battle scroll, if we get away with just 10 points on Thunderers, I can live with that. I don't take Thunderers.
Yeah. Cool. There's a couple of things I wanted.
Oh,
Con, you go first. Con.
I also wanted to ask some questions, I guess.
Of course, yeah.
Battle tactic wise, what do you do first, and how do you do the get in, get out of the boat tactics?
Yeah, tactics is actually one thing that this list does sometimes struggle with, just because you've got the one boat in which you can get things into and out of is also a very aggressive piece. So sometimes by the time you throw your boat at your opponent, you might have lost a character or two, which prevents you getting into and out of the boats. My opening battle tactic was almost always surround and destroy, though, because those 2 units of 10 Arcanauts, or 1 unit of 10 Arcanauts running off that way, and then the gunhauler or another 10 Arcanauts running that way, and then keeping a character back or something on home deployment edge. Surround and destroy was always sort of like that opening battle tactic. I think there was only one game where I didn't go for surround and destroy as my opening battle tactic, and that might have been like for an opening salvo. But yeah, 9 times out of 10, I just do that positioning for the opening one. And a lot of games, I don't even shoot on my opening turn. I don't even I just keep my I maximize my distances. I screen up, and I don't even shoot the enemy at all. I'll just go for positioning and taking objectives.
I guess you could teleport that frigate in some corner in your enemy's territory, and then that's your 2 units for 2 sides, and then have your
the gunhauler can squeeze into the smallest pocket, and typically as well, like the way I'll sequence it now is I'll do surround and destroy as my first, and then I'll have my 3 characters out of the boat on the first turn. When I turn 2, mobilize the fleet, and then turn 3 is when I kind of get stuck in, and so then I can go for boots in the ground, or which is also easy to score with the frigate charge, because you can disembark units after it charges, and you can absolutely send it with your 36-inch charge. You can teleport it anywhere and pretty reliably get that frigate into the spot that you need to get it into. What I like to do is I have a base, like a frigate base. I just have a spare base of it, and I'll give it to my opponent to help them screen out their backboard. But sometimes what that does is it makes them kind of hold back powerful units. Like I did that against Gitz. The guy was a fantastic player, really good opponent, really good dude. And I was just like, look, here's the base of the frigate. I can get into lots of little corners. And what he did is he ended up holding 2 units of 10 Boingrots back to screen out his backboard, because he knew that this is like the template and this is where it can go. And so
psychological warfare, I love it.
Yeah, exactly. It's a little trick. And also just a way to kind of help out your opponent with their screening and stuff like that.
Of course.
But yeah, so battle tactics, I typically score, usually I score like maybe 4 a game, sometimes I might drop 1. Most of the time I score 5, but yeah, there'll be many games where I score like 4 only or something like that. And even then, you've got 2 movement ones in the core book, surround and destroy and intimidate the invaders. So all you have to do is just kill something on an objective, get your guys in a boat, and I don't know, maybe make some charges or something, or opening salvo or something like that. And it's I tend to use a lot more of the general's handbook tactics as well with this list.
Cool. There was a couple of things I wanted to mention / ask, but I didn't want to interrupt you during your, because you're very eloquently explaining a lot there. So yeah, I didn't want to interrupt. But I think go back to the gunhauler for a second. You mentioned how that's like a grand strategy, backup. But it's also helping with your grand strategy in another way, because it does provide that ward save for the frigate as well. So if you're keeping it near it, of course, I don't know. Do you do that, or
typically? I tend to find that a lot of the units in this list kind of have that binary existence. And I even found this with the engine rigger healing. So I do deploy the gunhauler within range of the frigate every game, just to give it that 6-up ward for long range mortal wounds, or it's this, that, or the other. But most of the time, I tend to send it off on its own mission, because that 6-up, when someone's dedicated towards killing the frigate, they usually just kill it. And regardless of whether I had a 6-up ward, they just put enough resources into the frigate to take it out. Especially when I tell them that I have, 9 engine riggers that can heal up the boat pretty much instantly. And so people either tend to target only the riggers, or they kill a boat in one go. So yeah, the 6-up ward is very useful, but I tend to find it doesn't come into effect that often. The frustrating, one of the frustrations of the War Scroll is that it 6-up water aura does not apply to itself. So it's a bit of a giver, not a taker,
If it did, man, that gunhauler list would be insane.
Yes. Yeah, it would be.
Do gunhaulers give the war to other gunhaulers?
No.
Oh, it's only other boats. Okay.
Yeah. They thought of that. Yeah.
One last thing I might also mention about the list is my sort of boat artifact. My boat artifact is prudency shoots, and I take that just because the frigates don't tend to have great boat artifacts. I never really saw the value of taking collapsible compartments because I put 12 models in the frigate, so I kind of use its points worth of capacity. Anyways, it kind of feels a little bit more elegant, just sort of using the entire resources of the frigate. And that's, if I'm endangering 3 of my characters in the gunhauler, I can't send it off on those suicide missions that I like to do, because you've got your navigator and your engine master and whoever else, and then you're kind of like dispersing your resources, where this list is all about packing as much power into a smaller sort of base as possible, and then just sort of slipping that into the enemy. And prudency shoots is great for that because if they kill the frigate in an unexpected manner, you can get your guys out and you're not taking tests.
And you can get your guys out within 3 of the enemy, which I found really useful for when someone annoyingly goes, oh wait, I could just wrap the boat around with my unit, and you go, okay, I drop out on the other side of your unit. Wait, hang on.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Like you can just. Brock is a little difficult with that, because his base is so large. So like, when you charge the frigate and then you get Brock out, you kind of basically have to like be in base contact with the frigate wherever you put him. But he's such a good unit to get the always strikes first on because he has all that output and he has the mortal wounds as well. So the idea is that like you could mortal wound charge something with the frigate, get all those mortal wounds on there, and then fight something else with Brock, and then finish off that first thing with his mortal wounds. So there's all these like sources of like mortal wounds in the army that come from unexpected places, which is also very useful.
Yeah. Another thing I was thinking earlier when you were talking about the navigator and how you like to put him really far forward, there's a nice little synergy there with Gotrek, which just having him there on the front line just gives you that extra safety of putting things forward, because people are like, okay, well, if I want to mess with that navigator, I've got to go mess with Gotrek, basically.
So exactly.
Yeah.
Or if the other case for it is the other sort of reason I put him forward is because all the spells that in the game that kind of cancel wards. So there's a couple spells in the game that cancel ward saves. The Starseer has one, and I think Cruel Boys also have one. But the range of those spells is 18 inches. So if you are within 18 inches of Gotrek, you're also within 30 of the Navigator, which means the Navigator can cancel that spell instantly. And so that's sort of like another layer of protection for Gotrek. And as you mentioned, then that Gotrek's protecting the Navigator by being this sort of big disincentive,
It's kind of a power pair in some ways. A bit like how the frigates give the Endriggers cover and -1 to hit, and then the Endriggers are heal the frigate. It's like a two-way synergy happening with them. It's cool.
Exactly.
So you mentioned you lost your first game against Flesh Eater Courts, and you mentioned that Gotrek died. Was it turn 1?
So in this game, it was against Flesh Eater Courts, against second ed Flesh Eater Courts, and so this is a sort of a version of Flesh Eater Courts, very different from the third ed book. It's about sort of sustain and like bringing units back, more about just mustering a lot of units in your first turn and then pumping up certain units to unbelievable heights. And so Gotrek was kind of doing his thing. He was projecting this sort of like aura of fear, and so I moved him 10 inches forward, and there was a piece of garrisonable terrain right next to him. So what I did is I put his base up against the side, because I thought that 9 crypt horrors, surely I can kind of prevent some of them from getting their attacks in. But so my opponent pumped him up with every spell imaginable. You know, Hoarfrost on like the hits. I think it was a red actually, -2 red on Hoarfrost. He had +3 attacks from Drain's transformations on each of them. He had all of these layered buffs, and suddenly and then he rolled well enough in his charge with them that they could sort of wrap Gotrek completely. And with the 2-inch range, all 9 of them got into fighting range. Even with like that tactic of backing them up against the side of the building. And so what that kind of meant is that even just with 60 attacks, that's enough to like get through his late defense, because you know I'd finest out him and all that defense him, but it just wasn't enough. You know, enough layers of defense there. Like if I'd put him in the garrison, maybe that'd have been an extra layer of defense. But yeah, you know, it's sort of like much of a muchness really. And then as soon as Gotrek died, my whole sort of because it was the geomantic pulse, and we'd kind of done that classic thing where one person puts their whole army on one side and the other person puts their whole army on the other side. And he'd won the roll off and sort of given me the turn and then put the pulse on his side. What they kind of did was it sort of isolated part of my army and just allowed them to sort of target the 10 Arcanauts I had over there and Gotrek there. And so, yeah, they took them out in one go. And then I sort of like tried to take out those 9 crypt horrors, you know, with the rest of my army. I didn't have enough output to chew through all those wounds, especially because he had them in the garrison. He had the 5-up ward on them, and he had like Mystic Shield and all that defense and all that stuff. So I just didn't have the output to chew through them. And then on their swing back, he killed like the frigate and a bunch of Endrogers. And so the game was basically over at that point. And I was just sort of scrapping for battle tactics here and there where I could. But yeah, so another aspect of that game was that there were huge amounts, like the board was basically covered in terrain. And there was like 8 large, I think there was about 10 very large pieces of terrain all along the edges of the board. So there's no way that I could squeeze the frigate outside of an inch of a piece of terrain within, you know, 9 inches of his like backline unit. So there's nowhere I could like pounce on him because these pieces of terrain were really blocking me up. So it was always going to be like a kind of a tough game from the beginning. But yeah, that was the first game. So that was actually quite a large loss. But that allowed me to then kind of play opponents that had sort of like comparable losses in subsequent rounds. So I kind of like submarined my way back up to like 8th place. I kind of squeezed into that top 8. You know?
Yeah. But do you find with this list, if you do lose Gotrek quite early on, is it sort of game over, or does it not matter much at all? Is it kind of depends on the game a bit?
Depends. Yeah, it depends on the circumstances. I played another game against Daughters of Cain where he sent 10 of those fighty snakes that have fight on death into Gotrek. And, you know, they fought him, they did half the damage, then he fought them, killed them all, then they fought in death and killed Gotrek. But I ended up winning that game because just the frigate with 9 engine riggers removed, you know, like 30 snakes when I needed them to. And so like the real power of the list is actually the 9 engine riggers and the frigate. Like that can, and Brock, you know, that sort of 1,000-point package can lift, you know, an entire army given enough time just by running around and shooting things and charging things. So yeah, it's really just dependent on the circumstances. And yeah, so you know, typically if I do lose Gotrek very early, I'm having a much harder time, but that kind of rarely happens. You know, it doesn't happen all that often.
Yeah, I mean, because I use Gotrek as well, and I'm just trying to figure, and I don't think any of the games where I have lost him early, and there have been ones like you mentioned, like Crawl Boys have the spell to remove the ward, and I mismeasured in a game and thought it was out of range, and he wasn't, and lost him early. But I find that quite often, if they target Gotrek, it's actually kind of a good thing because it means that all your KO stuff that's fragile is fine because they're not going for that. So, and
they have to put in a lot to take him out as well.
Yeah.
Some units have the volume of attacks that just make them prime Gotrek hunters, but you can use terrain and you can screen Gotrek with Arcanauts to kind of prevent those units from leveraging their full attacks because his base is so small. You know, typically units that have the volume of attacks to kill him can't get every model in range, and so you know with Lookout Sir as well, 88 bliss barbs might not kill him in one turn because suddenly he's got 10 Arcanauts to protect him that far. And then you can kind of abuse, you can use terrain. And if you have Wildwoods, you can just, if there's a Wildwood in a central position, you can just put him in the Wildwood and that will protect him against all the shooting that will take him out. So you can play around it. But there's definitely counters to him out there. Like plenty of really quite good counters, including just not interacting with them.
Yeah, I mean that does happen sometimes, and you feel like he's, depending on the battle plan. Like if he's sitting and blocking people from going on objectives, then you don't mind because he's essentially holding objectives. But the ones where people can remove objectives, and if the objectives he's near keep getting removed, it can be a bit, it's just a 480 point model running around and not charging anything. Not, it can be a bit frustrating sometimes. But, yeah. Not very often, luckily. One other question about Gotrek before we move on is, do you ever find that people just sort of will run really cheap things onto objectives and just outnumber him and not get into combat with him?
So in some games, yeah, they kind of trade with them. But I mean, every time, like if somebody kind of gives up a unit for him, I kind of mentally treat that as a win. And a lot of the lists I've been encountering in tournaments and stuff tend to not have like a lot of trading pieces. Like they kind of tend to, because everyone's trying to squeeze into say a battle regiment, or people are running like elite combos of heroes and kind of big knockout units. A lot of folks don't tend to have like the trading pieces they need to like constantly feed Gotrek, I suppose. And at the end of the day, if you give him something and then you can charge him, kill that unit, and then off of the distance you get off that charge, get into their next castle, if you want a double turn or something like that, I tend to find you can put him in the place he needs to be often enough.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, feeding units to him is just providing him with free movement. So it's kind of helpful in some ways. And also, normally, if they do have that cheap unit, it probably is there to do another job as well. So if they're feeding it into Gotrek just to outnumber him on an objective, it means it's not screening something or something like that. So cool. So if we'll move on to Nathan's list, and then once we sort of cover Nathan's list, we'll talk about what happened when you two played each other, because that did happen. Cool. So I just need to wake up my mouse. There we go. So Nathan, you have Barak Nar as well, but a very different take on things. 1970 points, one drop, of Admiral as your general, with Stormcaller, a Navigator with Voidstone Orb, as we see in a lot of lists, a Chemist with an Old Stone Icon, 2 units of 20 Arcanauts, and then 15 Thunderers with all the special weapons, a Gunhauler with the compartments, and then 1 little unit of 3 Endriggers and an Ironclad, all for 1 drop. So what was your thinking? Like, what were you planning with this list and your thought process?
Classic Aethercast misspell.
Oh, what's that?
Always take what you are owed.
Ah, there we go.
There it is.
Had to be somewhere. I think we got through, even no one noticed it, we got through the last show without a typo. So. Just throwing that out there.
Can't have that.
Don't always have typos.
Yeah. I think the starters is the sub-faction. Like, Nar is good to CP, but also it's a toss-up between Nar and Urbaz. Urbaz, you get that +1 to wound guaranteed, but you give up Stormcaller because you've got to take your Thunderers as battle line. So it's sort of a, what do you want? Do you want the reliability on the Navigator, which I do. I don't like the Navigator. It's so often you don't roll the dice you want. So having that reroll is so important. And just even in Urbaz, even though you had a free CP to the Thunderers, a free CP on the boat, there were turns where I would run out of CP. So Nar becomes a lot more attractive in that regard. And you still occasionally will run out of CP with Barak Nar if you go first. If you're going second in the turn, you have more CP than you know what to do with. So that's probably the first part, I think, where Nar sort of just edges out. You're 1970, so you often have a triumph bid, although I'm finding more and more that becomes 50-50 half the time. I think people are pushing lists lower and lower. So you're not always guaranteed the +1 to wound, but it's also not that important ultimately. The 1-drop's important. I want to be able to control the board. I want to be able to control the turn order. And that's a big part of how this list plays. So probably the 20 Arcanauts are probably the low key, the most important units in the list. For slightly different reasons than Luca said, is that, like you said, if you got 10, they just die. And it's easy to kill 10, relatively. 20, you've got to put a bit of effort into killing them. So if you do want to have them go from 20 to 0, sometimes you've got to put in a bigger unit or a more key piece to kill 20 Arcanauts. So the way I'll play the game is I want to situate those Arcanauts where you've got to overextend to come and kill them. You've got to push out a bit further or leave your comfort zone. And when you do, there's 15 Thunderers sitting behind ready to take them out. So it's sort of a, look, if you don't overcommit, they'll live, and I have a 4-8 rally, and they'll all just come back. They can be worth double on an objective, so they're really good at standing on circles. And it sort of forces people into trying to kill them. And that's what I want to do. I'm basically setting up the game, go on to the days where you alpha turn 1 and put 30 Thunderers up in people's face. You've got to play a bit more carefully. So the 2 blocks of 20 Arcanauts are basically controlling the board. You don't want to overextend yourself too much. You just want to dangle that bait out a little bit and just go, do you want the objective? I've got 16 models worth on there. You can't just toe onto the objective. You've got to really push onto there and overcommit. And once that happens, I can start picking people off. That's the plan. Doesn't always work, but that's plan 1. So that's where the Arcanauts, I think, are really key. 20 are just amazing. I love Arcanauts, and I think they just do so much work in a list. They might not necessarily kill a whole lot. That said, 2d6 on those machine guns are phenomenal. The amount of times I've rolled 18, 20 shots, it's far better than the old flat 6 that we used to have, that's for sure. I think the Navigator plays a role, similar to what Lucas said. One of the options is to push him forward, threaten that turn 1 battle tactic. But the other one is more when you hit that go button and you smash in, you're often going to be in range of a blizzard or the countercharge from something with a Hoarfrost. The Navigator helps protect against that. If you're going in, you know that you can stop their Hoarfrost. You know that their crackback nuts are bad. And Stormcaller helps with that too. If you're going to go pick a flank off, you can use Stormcaller and go, right, those units in the middle, they're half move. So now you can't get across to me as much. So, and that's, in a nutshell, that's the list. The Gunhaul is probably the one bit of tech that I get asked about the most, why the collapsible compartment. Partly insurance. If everything goes horribly wrong, you can get 3 units into a gunhauler, and much like Kron's list, you still run around score battle tactics. You've still got your grand strat. You've still got some options. The other side of it is you can pop 3 riggers in there, and it's a bit of a sacrificial piece. You can go off and you leave something on 2 wounds. It can go charge in, finish the job. It might be dangling out in the wind, but then people focus on the gunhauler and not your Thunderers. So it's quite a good piece. A little bit of sneaky tech is you can put 3 riggers in a gunhauler and do surround and destroy in a corner. They're both technically on the battlefield. I don't do surround and destroy very often. It is nice to have that up your sleeve. I think this list, I tend to score 5 and 5 battle tactics every game, but I've got 7 or 8 to choose from, which is incredible. I think it's one of KO's biggest strengths. The GHB has given us a lot of gifts in terms of battle tactics. So it's just nice to have options. You're not just locked to, these are my 5 battle tactics. I have to do these 5 in this order. I've got flexibility. Depends on the map, depends on the opponent, so I can mix and match how I want to go.
They give us tempo advantage as well, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just nice to have one small combat unit in a shooting army. Sometimes you just need to just knock something to get it off the objective, or you're just a little bit short. So it just gives you that option. It's probably a bit of a wishy-washy answer, but they're so flexible that I can just sort of adapt to the mission with the gunhauler and the riggers. Sometimes they'll stay in the ironclad to protect against chip damage. Other times they're an aggressive go out and punch force. So I like having that flexibility, especially if plan A of push Arkanauts up, make you come to me isn't going to work. Then I can switch to the gunhauler being a bit more aggressive and use that as the bait and try and get you to overextend that way. So that's basically it in a nutshell.
They've got combat, but they've also
Chemist and
got
Admiral are
night
pretty
shooting.
self-explanatory in a shooting army. What's that? Sorry.
Oh, the Endriggers, they've got combat, but they also just have nice shooting. Just the Ren 2 shooting.
Yeah, Ren 2 as well.
Cuts through things.
Yeah.
And sometimes you'll pop off with them first because people hear Ren 2 and go, oh no, we need to use that all out defense. And you're like, excellent. That's not what I wanted you to use it on. Let's shoot over there. So sometimes you can try and use it as bait. Most people don't fall for it. But, it's worth dangling that bait as well every now and then. Ren 2 scares people sometimes. So, they only do 3 or 4 damage most of the time. But it's nice little chip damage. It all adds up.
So if you don't do surround and destroy very often, which battle tactics are you doing most? I'm assuming you probably are getting things out of the boat at some point because you've got 15 thunderers and the chemist needs to get out of the boat to buff them and stuff. So I guess you're doing that one. And then once they're out of the boat, I guess it's quite easy to get them back in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are you doing opening salvo?
You're often doing opening salvo a lot. Because I'm one drop, I can often give away turn 1, which is great for people moving their screens up a bit closer. It sort of allows me to go, right, you've just moved a unit up where I can safely push within 18. I've rolled a 1 on the navigator, so that unit over there can't come and get me. I can push up safely. I know that there's no threat coming at me. I know that I'm not going to get doubled. So I'm safe to move up to this spot, usually a flank, and kill that unit. With everything I've got, and when you've got all the things in range, it's a pretty reliable battle tactic, except for one of my games against Luca. Spoilers. But the other one's Stake a Claim. I try and hold that for a bit later, but sometimes an early Stake a Claim is a nice one. I
guess that's battle plan dependent, is it?
It is battle plan dependent, absolutely. But again, if you're going second, even the ones where you can't not sit on, you can deliberately not set up on objectives, but there's missions where there's no objectives in your deployment zone. But if you've given them first, they've pushed up, they've taken an objective, you might be able to push up and take 2, or take an objective back off of them. And so sometimes Stake a Claim's quite an easy one. And opening salvo is one of those weird ones where people presume you have to use it turn 1. And that's not always the case. There are games where I won't kill anything for a couple of turns. My game 5 was a good example of that, where I used opening salvo turn 3 because we hadn't killed anything. So you can keep that in your back pocket if you know you're going to play a bit cagier and a bit more careful. You can sort of chip down a unit to make it a bit easier. I think people sort of think, opening salvo, I have to use it turn 1, but sometimes it's good to hold on for a little bit later. You might lose it, but if you've got an easy Stake a Claim, there's no guarantee you'll get that later on either. So, especially with Arkanauts sitting on objectives, you're often not behind on objectives. So, generally go for those 2. Like you said, get into a boat, get out of a boat. Opponents love that. You always get the eye roll when you're saying to get 3 dudes into a boat. You just get that. Okay.
Tactical genius.
Classic. Tactical. The brilliance. They love that battle tactic in particular, I found. And Intimidate. You're often out pushing out into their stuff. So Intimidate's pretty easy as well. So, and then there's a few situational ones that'll pop up. But, we got, you've got 7 battle tactics that are quite often pick and choose. And, blast them to smithereens situationally is phenomenal. You've got to be a little bit careful with that one. But, sometimes it's just a slam dunk. Cool, you've got 2 dudes over there. As long as you're not playing like Soul
It's a big area
or something that can return a model within range, it can be just a big slam dunk. So,
because it's 12 inches of the objective, not just 6 inches of the objective. That's actually a really big area, and so sometimes it looks like, oh yeah, I can probably do that, and then you start measuring, you're like, okay, well actually there's also these other 2 units in range and stuff like that. So Do you find that
Gotta be
the
careful.
2 units of 20 Arcanauts are partly what's helping you, maybe you opening salvo later in the game? Because, if you had just units of 10 Arcanauts, it'd be picked off and then it discounts that battle tactic.
Absolutely. It's great for that. You're not losing units, and if you are losing units, they've generally had to come to you, and like I said before, they've overextended. And so if you've lost a unit and you don't have opening salvo, that's not the end of the world, because they've actually played into your game plan. So you can switch to a different battle tactic, or even if you drop a battle tactic, you know you're going to be able to shoot them off the board, so it doesn't matter. So there are games where you might drop a turn 1 battle tactic and it's fine, because your plan isn't to be playing 5 turns. Your plan is to just shoot them off the board. So it's not the end of the world,
because they're not going to get a battle tactic in turn 5, so or maybe turn 4 and 3 as well. Cool.
Yeah, exactly.
So I mean, obviously you won pretty much every game except for the one that you drew against ogres. I have noted down there as well that you played Soulbite Gravelords in the second game. That was really close as well.
It was.
Was that just because they
that was Vengoran
bodies in the recursion and pardon?
No, so he's playing Monster Mash Soulblights, and he's quite a good player, and he also plays KO, so he knows the KO matchup. That said, there was a few things that I would do, and he sort of said, "Oh, you can't do that."
Was that the one that was against Ben
You definitely can. It was, yeah. Phenomenal bloke. I love Ben. I played him.
Because he used to play KO. He played KO years ago when KO first came out.
He did. Yeah, I think he played a bit of Barak Nar for a little bit there. So, he knows KO, but it highlights that if you don't play KO a lot, there's lots of tiny little rules that people overlook or have got in their head from the last book that have changed, like being able to move a boat and then fly high. And I think that's an important thing. If you're playing KO, make sure you know your rules really well, because there's so many little neat tricks that you can do that if you're not doing them, you're doing yourself a disservice playing this army. So I think I caught him off with a few things where I went to do something. He's like, "Hang on." I was like, "No, you absolutely can." And he was like, "Oh, man, you totally can." But because he was playing the Vengoran Lord list, if you don't kill something, it can fully bloody heal. And so he's got these big monsters, and Sorry, go.
Oh, would you be able to go over some of those tricks? I think that'd be super useful for some of the people watching.
Yeah, well, I mean, move and fly high is a big one, because you can often maybe get a free bombing run out of it. You can often try and trigger a redeploy that you want to, maybe get them to move, think that you're trying to do something when you're actually planning on doing something else. A little bit of mind games. One of my favorite tricks, and it feels wrong, but is getting out of a boat when you're in combat. You can just get out. That's not a retreat. So you can get, if you've got 3 riggers, you just get out and just go over there. I mean, we all know the old boat shuffle.
2 units retreating and 2 charging one, because you can get your units out of the boat, then have the boat retreat and do disengage, so it can retreat and shoot, and then the unit that go out of the boat can charge. So it's cool.
That's phenomenal.
You can redeploy into boats as well.
Yes, redeploying into boats. I missed the double CP where you could redeploy into a boat and then redeploy the boat. That was phenomenal. But that was like little tricks like that, and just knowing that you can move the boat, move it like a hero into the boat, and then fly high to go somewhere else. That might set up a surround and destroy in a dire situation. I had a game recently where I was like, it was a KO mirror as well. I thought, this bloke's got no turn 5 battle tactic, and he's legged a hero up, moved the gunhauler up, got into the gunhauler, flew, fly high, and you're like, damn, didn't see that. So there's lots of little movement tricks that you can do and set up those kind of situations. I think it's just reading the rules closely and making sure you don't miss those things that say you can't do this. That word is missing from a lot of our rules, which is great. So
another one is moving after you get out of the boat as well.
Yes,
because you get sometimes you're like, I'm going to do the one to get 3 guys out of the boat, and they're like, don't they have to be in enemy territory? It's like, but after they get out, they're going to run. So, and then there's like 3 heroes just run off into the corner.
Exactly. And I think that's another thing that's worth mentioning is when you do boots on the ground, if you've got 3 heroes, just make sure the 3 heroes are in. You can toe the line. Doesn't matter if the Thunderers aren't in, as long as those 3 heroes push over. I think I've played some games where people presume that I'm going to put the Thunderers in their deployment, and just the heroes. 3 little bases, pretty easy to do. So, and you also want to try and, it's not ideal, but if you're going to do boots on the ground, and you've done a situation where you've got models into the boat as well, sometimes you just want to get the Thunderers out. So you just got to sort of be mindful of who goes in, who goes out. You sort of got to think about that a turn or two in advance, because sometimes you can stuff yourself up a little bit. So I don't always do boots on the ground, the turn that I go in really hard, because I don't always want to get all the models out, or I want to get all the models out, but I don't want to have to get them all back in and have to stay in if I do get back in the boat the next turn. So you just sort of got to think about the sequencing and how you go about it. So,
yeah. Cool. And the game that you drew against Ogres, I mean, what happened in that one?
Yeah, that was a tough game. So I was playing against Dave Kerr, who is one of the best players in the country.
Yeah.
I
mean, I've heard of
him.
I'm the other side of the planet.
Yep. So, Dave's a phenomenal player. We were actually staying in a house together. So we were joking the night before, like, I should probably poison your food a little bit just in case I get you tomorrow and stuff like that. And then we drew each other. So I was like, we were joking about this. But anyway, but he had a lot of anti-shooting tech. The Ogres list has a surprising amount of neg 1 to wound versus shooting, which isn't great. The Stonehorn has a native neg 1 to wound from his mount trait. So there's a lot of you're not necessarily going to kill what you shoot, which is really tough. And it was the mission where you can burn objectives. So I've just tried to stay a point behind him. And then there was a turn where he caught me off guard, where he just auto-run a Stonehorn onto an objective and took it back from me. And that put me 3 points down. It was a phenomenal move, which I didn't see coming. I had basically committed my entire force onto a top objective. We were down to 2 far objectives at this point. I was trying to spread his force out. But he had models on the middle of the objective, so I could go and get about 7 bodies on there. And didn't really think much of it at the time. I was like, look, I get the objective back. It's mine. Great. And he saw it and gone, well, Stonehorn's worth 10, isn't it? And just pushed up. He didn't care that he wasn't going to charge. It was about the points. And so from that point, I'm fighting to stay in the game. So I was able to keep him to no points in the last turn. And but we both scored equal battle tactics and equal grand strat. So, I pulled it back to a draw, but it was tough. I think Ogres people often think, that might be an easy matchup, but when some of your units win on 4s already, and they've got neg 1 to wound, and you've only got that 1 triumph, you've got to be real careful. It took a lot to bring the Stonehorn down. It took almost my entire army, and I had to charge him and use fumigators to finish him off. So it was tight.
Yeah.
Dave could be running just a list of Noblars, and it's still not going to be an easy matchup.
Exactly. It's as much about the player as it was the list, but it was a bit of a combo in this case.
I love that. I read that list and I looked at his army, beautiful army as well, amazingly painted. But that list is just really so elegant, in my opinion. You just got so many pieces that do it looks like a very refined list.
Yeah, it was great, and it works real well against shooting. So. And you've just got to be careful. You've got to watch the flying monster when he hits 3d6 fly around. You've got to be careful that he doesn't fly over into a boat or take out a key piece. So you've got to position really carefully. And I was able to spread his force out and try and pick him off bit by bit, but it was tough. So that was where the draw came from. Phenomenal player, and full credit to him. He caught me with my pants down on a turn, and that put me behind. So. I had to play pretty well to just keep it to a draw at that point, and I'm really glad I did.
Cool. I should have asked this question earlier, really, when we talked about the list. But the 20 Arcanauts, do you ever find that you unleash hell with them much? And is it pretty effective? Because obviously, Unit 10 doesn't normally do much, but
no. Occasionally, I will. It's actually one of the reasons I don't think you've noted in there, but I actually take the flare pistol on the sergeant, not the volley pistol.
Right. Okay.
And it's something that most people don't really care about. But because it's 3/3's Ren 2, often when I do a stand and shoot, it almost always lands a wound. And so they're not so bad at standing and shooting because you've got a bit of randomness. Yeah, I think it's Ren 2. So it's just this one little damage pop shot, but often it lands damage. And so when you are standing and shooting with the Arcanauts, which isn't super often, but occasionally you know that that's all they're going to charge, it just helps add a couple of extra points of damage in. So, yeah.
I think I completely missed that it was Ren 2 now, but I just checked it is. Because I normally just take the volley pistol.
So, yeah. So if they're on the objective, he's hitting on 2s.
Yeah. Or if you're unleashing hell,
it's a nice little
you're negating that -1. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. So if nothing else, I always do at least 1 damage with him. So at least when they are on the stand and shoot, you're going to do a couple of points of damage, but it's just situational. But yeah, usually I will, because often I'm trying to set up so only they're getting charged anyway. If there's going to be another potential charge target, no, I won't. But why not? You've got enough CP. If only they're getting charged, hope you roll well on the 4d6 of shots for the pistols and all that stuff. And weighted dice. You never know.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of attacks for 20 Arcanauts. So yeah,
absolutely.
Something's got to get through.
Exactly.
And for 90 points for 10, they're just incredible value. They're probably one of the most points efficient units in the whole book, in my opinion. They just
phenomenal.
I mean, the whole thing is standing in circles, so it's relatively easy to get them to the circles. And then once they're there, 4-up rally, 4-up save, weight of dice, for 480 points, it's a phenomenal unit, in my opinion.
Yeah, and being able to make them worth double on an objective, I think, is their real strength. KO's traditionally not been great at the whole standing on circles thing. But when you can use the Arcanauts and just, outscore, even against Mega Gargants, you've got some game to push on and score the objective. It's it just adds to the strength of the army phenomenally. So it's low key, they are just MVPs in my opinion.
Yeah, cool. So I guess the thing that most people watching the show are going to be interested in is what happened when you two played each other.
It was a good game. The KO mirror is always a funny
first thing. The mission was kind of important. Yeah, so the mission was important, particularly for Luca, because it was no reward without risk. And he has bloody Gotrek, hasn't he? So Gotrek's going to start in the middle of the board, but in our game, there's a big bit of impassable terrain in the middle of the table. And I won the roll-off, I think, if memory serves. And so I've chosen the side. I've given him the side where that impassable terrain was more in his deployment. So I was trying to push Gotrek back as far as I possibly could. I think he had the option to deploy Gotrek very smack bang in the middle of the board, but he would have had impassable terrain behind him. So he wouldn't have had that support. He wouldn't have had that Arcanaut screen. So if he had have done that, there was a world where I can bring all of my guns onto Gotrek, hopefully kill him. Or he was going to have to push Gotrek back a little bit. So that was a really important roll-off for me. Because Gotrek being up on my business isn't ideal. Like I said, 20 Arcanauts are great, but Gotrek will mince them. So this was sort of the KO mirror is always about who can clear off the other screen and go in first. I think it's who can get that go turn. And being the one drop, I get to control that, but Gotrek puts that on a clock. I don't have a lot of time because he'll clear my screens pretty quick. So all I wanted to do was screen off, and I think we both deployed very similar, didn't we, Luca? Where just Arcanaut ring, boats in the back of the board, and Arcanaut rings protecting ourselves. So,
exactly. I was
turns, just waiting for that.
I was very careful to make sure there was about 11 inches of distance between my boat and my screens, just to account for the 3-inch disembark from when you fly high and you get the thunders out, so you kind of can keep that 18 inches of distance, I think it is, from you and then everything else. But screening was a big complicated part of that game, in my opinion. Really vital part.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I made a mistake turn one. I was a little bit nervous, actually. So my round one, I actually got a bye in the top 8. We had a player drop. I was the top seeded player. So I got a bye. So I sort of thought, oh, well, I'm nice, I'm relaxed. I haven't had to play a game. But then when I rocked up the game with Luca, I was like, shit, I'm nervous. I haven't played a game yet today. Whereas Luca, he's played a game. He's won it. He's in the zone. So I was like, oh, so I actually went with opening salvo turn one. And I actually made a mistake where I moved my Arcanauts and couldn't quite get the full range of things into a unit of Arcanauts that I wanted. And then Luca made a couple of clutch saves on those big, massive cannon shots. So I didn't get the opening salvo turn one, which also, more importantly, meant I didn't clear off his screens like I wanted. And that was a problem. So I actually made a mistake. It was a couple of points down, which, like I said earlier, wasn't a big deal because it was going to be a case of one of us was going to wipe the other pretty quickly. So I didn't mind that I was 2 points down, but not clearing the screens was a real problem. But fortunately, Luke is kind of relying on Gotrek to clear my screen, so it gives me that extra turn. I think turn 2, I focused. He had a unit of 10 Arcanauts on one flank and 2 10s, sort of protecting the longer board edge. And so I focused on the 2 10s, trying to clear a hole. I managed to shoot off one and sacrifice the gunhauler with some riggers. This was a game where they became a bit of a sacrificial pawn, and was able to charge in and clear a screen off. And I guess we'll see your point of view, Luca, but it's meant that Luca's pushed up just out a little bit to try and kill off the gunhauler and riggers. And I think that ended up being the mistake, because it's allowed me to then in turn 3 jump the ironclad over, get everything out, and just be in range of the frigate. Not with the 12-inch guns, but with the 18-inch guns, and that was able to take the frigate out. And then I won priority into the next turn. So being that one drop, I'm always threatening the double turn, which is a lesson I learned from playing Krohn in my very first KO mirror a couple of years back. I got doubled, and that was game over. So it's a lesson that stuck
I think
in the KO.
That KO double.
Yeah. KO double.
I think, did you win both priorities, or did I win the first? I can't remember, but
so.
Yeah. There was also a crucial role. You cleared off that long board edge where I had 2 units of 10 kind of conga lined out. He cleared this upper unit of 10, and so I took my unit of 10 that was protecting the short board edge, and I ran it back to sort of reform the screen. But they had taken some casualties, and so I started. I had 2 turns of rolling some 4-up rallies just to sort of extend to get some bodies back.
Yeah.
But across 8 rolls, I didn't roll any 4-ups, and so I couldn't extend not a single one getting back. So I couldn't extend the that battle line crucially to push you out the 18 inches that I needed to. And then just enough damage from the ironclad managed to take out the frigate to then put it on 1 wound. To take it out basically, which meant that my sort of main delivery of damage into the Thunderers or whatever I was going to do, it didn't work out. And obviously you won the prior as well. So even if the frigate had stayed alive on however many wounds, you probably would have taken it out the next turn anyways. So just a few minor.
Key to take the frigate out. Otherwise, you can charge, get the mortals, get the strike first. Whereas with the frigate gone, you've got to charge something in. And it's basically a case if you've got Brock and the 9 riggers, one of those has to go in first, and it's getting shot, which isn't ideal. And I think that set me up. Even if I didn't get the prior, killing the frigate was probably the important thing, which I managed to do. And I think I'd killed everything around you at that point. You didn't really have anything else sacrificial. The Arcanauts were all more or less dead. The gunhauler, I think I'd killed. Gotrek's on the other side of the board at this point, chewing through what was left of my poor Arcanauts, which wasn't much. You did good work. And so, it was just a case of getting there. And I think at that point, I think at that point we called it because there's no world where Gotrek's catching an ironclad, and there's no world where I'm going to put him within 12 inches of an ironclad. So we were just going to run around the objectives, chasing each other's tails, and at that point I can score battle tactics and prime marine maximum every turn, and that's the end of it. So it's I think the KO mirror is who can shoot who first, and if you get the double, it's particularly nasty in the KO mirror, and that went my way. So
certainly.
Despite a shaky first turn. It was a good game. KO mirrors are always very you play the game very differently than you would against other armies. It's an interesting challenge.
Yeah, the screening is, I think, like setting up your screens properly is a huge challenge. Against I guess like against any army that can kind of alpha you in a sense like that, like that has the movement to catch up with you. Screening is always a bit of a challenge with those, but yeah, particularly the KO, because they can just sort of put half their army in a single spot. Like they just, like, unlike any other army, they can just put 1,000, 1,200 points into a single base and then just put that somewhere and get all that output in.
Absolutely.
Cool. I mean, I guess at the point that you, from the roll off the double turn, you it's definitely, even if it wasn't completely over at that point, you knew that it would be. So double turns can often seal the deal for KO. Cool. Is there anything you guys wanted to mention about the tournament at all?
Other than the fact that I think it was just a great tournament. I think it was well put together, well run. All the tables had decent amounts of terrain with a variety of sort of identities. They'd allocated identities to the terrain before everyone got to the table, so you didn't have to go through that process of like rolling what's what and then trying to remember it. It's just write down these little plastic cards. And I actually found the terrain was quite impactful in a lot of my games, not just against the game with Nathan, but I had one game against Slaves of Darkness, and I sent a photo of this to the sort of like to you before the show. But there was a wide piece of impassable terrain right in front of my deployment zone, and then right next to it was a long garrison right next to it. So essentially, my entire deployment zone was blocked off, except for these two very narrow sort of passages. Gotrek guarded one of them, and then I screened the other one out with 10 Arcanauts. And so suddenly your whole army is sort of like immune to damage just on account of the fact that the terrain is there. So you can be a lot more like aggressive with your positioning because they can't actually get to you,
I like the inclusion of like garrisons and impassable terrain. It really changes the game when the terrain actually means something. I got a garrisonal piece at one point, put my ordinator in it. Suddenly his 9-inch aura is massive, and all the points are like, all right, let's go.
Awesome.
The other thing we had was obscuring terrain, which I think my opponents appreciated. Not many of them were able to use it all that great, but at my game against Dave, he was able to put a unit of Noblars, what was left of the unit of Noblars, into that terrain, so I couldn't see them to shoot them to finish them off, and that was important. The obscuring terrain was in the middle of the board. His Grand Stratters had more units in my deployment zone, so now we had a little unit that he could hide, safe from my shooting. Then in the last turn, could make a desperate run into my deployment zone to try and shore up his Grand Strat. My game against Ben, he was able to hide some Fellbats behind some obscuring terrain, for example, and so it just makes the game more interesting. It gives opponents that less feel bad of I'm just going to get shot. I can actually hide a hero, and the impassable terrain just makes them garrisonable. Makes the game more interesting from a movement perspective. I think it's I think it's more enjoyable to play that way. So it was good. I really appreciated it.
Try and get the guys at VicGT to introduce that stuff.
We'll see.
I also quite like the a lot of tournaments don't do it, but the sort of the sports metrics that they had, it was more of a checklist than it was like judge your opponent's sport. So I've been to a couple different tournaments that use sports as part of your score, and a lot of them just do it on like a scale of like 1 to 10, which means you've got to be a bit of a stand-up comedian at the table in order to score high in sports and in order to do well. But in this case, it was more just sort of like ensuring that you played, sort of in an appropriate manner. So you're just clear with what your army could do, clear with your measurements, clear with your rules. These sorts of like minimum decorum, minimum behaviors that you had to fulfill, and then you typically get your points for that. So I think it was an elegant way of like kind of incentivizing people to sort of behave appropriately at the table, beyond sort of their natural instinct to do so.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. Because normal
as a tournament, sorry, good old delays.
Yes, delays. I was going to say, the normal sort of systems. It's just like pick your favorite player. I've never thought that was a great way of sort of encouraging sporting behavior. Really, it was more just like you pick the person that you sort of had a better connection with, really, or something, or you sort of hit it off with more. So that's that. What were you going to say, Nathan?
Just the tournament in general, I think, was phenomenal. We had new TOs this year. So Cancon is probably one of our longer running tournaments. We had some new guys step up this year and take over, which was, and they did such a phenomenal job. It was Jason's first time being a TO, which I thought was insane. Taking over Cancon as your first TO, and he smashed it out of the park. So if it wasn't for those guys, we wouldn't have this great event. So I mean, that's the big props there. But I also like that there's a bit of everything for everyone. We had, at the end of day 2, you had a best overall, which is your sports, your paint, your gaming score. But then we have a top 8 cut, which is just purely the gaming side of it. So I think Sam Morgan won best overall. But then we go into that top 8 cut, and it's more like your best general. And I like that distinction between, overall and general. It gives a bit of everything for everyone. You've got a pretty phenomenal painting contest. You've got the coolest army as well. So people who want to do something really cool with their army, they can go into that side. The best painted was judged by some real top level painters. We have at Cancon, being a big event, there's Australia is one of their biggest painting competitions. So some of the best painters in the country, and in some cases from overseas, are present, and they were able to get them to come across and judge the painting. So there's a bit of everything in this tournament, and it's because it's such a big event. I think that's really important, and it was. I think that's one of the reasons why I like Cancon. It's also just you don't get to play at a big, massive, almost 200 player event all that often, and whilst it's hot as hell in those playing sheds, it's a great experience. You don't get that anywhere else. So
coolest armies were like there's someone who put like made a diorama out of like a giant like tree stumps essentially, and built this kind of like fairy garden-esque army out of vampires, and it was like we had like giant bats like pulling heads off people, and he had like the blood coming from the mouth and stuff. It was great. The coolest army was definitely amazing.
Yeah, I think all the coolest army nominations, which is a shameless self-plug, were all phenomenal. I managed to get a coolest army nom, which is actually one of the things I wanted going to Cancons. Like winning was gravy. I just wanted a coolest army nom. I wanted to go 4-1 and get a coolest army nom, and I came away with the first and a coolest army nom. So it was the best weekend for me. But some of those other armies that were in there were just like the effort people put in. It's just amazing to go and look at it all and just see what people have done that year.
It's a celebration of the hobby as a whole, I think, Cancon. As you mentioned, like it kind of you can look at the resultant stats and ladders, and you can slice and dice the rankings by what's important to you. So like you can slice it by who has the best painting score, and then you'll see like all the best, all the best painters and whatnot. Then you can slice and dice it by like, if you're interested in just the crunch of like the battle points, you can look at it in that way as well. So it's sort of caters to everyone's tastes fabulously, really.
Yeah. Cool. And there's a lot of KO there, and a lot of them were converted, which was some of the KO armies there were gorgeous. I had a club mate that's made them Chaos Dwarves. So they've got all this weird stuff. There's, I think, the Skaven-esque KO. There was one there, I think, that looked a bit like a lot of dock pieces on there. So some of the KO armies there were just phenomenal. Yeah, there's some cool
including
stuff.
yours were like these cool Votan converted KO.
Yeah. Yeah, my entire army's converted had a Votan models from 40k, so it's
What's your gunhauler
they
made
fit
out of?
surprisingly well for anyone that's thinking about it. The gunhauler's made out of if you give me 2 seconds. Here he is. The gunhauler's made out of the little here we go. So that's the gunhauler. Basically just a lot of boat bits stuck to a Votan vehicle. I can't think of the name of the vehicle. It's a small little one that they've got. So that's the
like the Sagittarius or something. The moon buggy thing.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, so it's just made out of that with a bunch of bits stuck to it. But there were some people there with like Skaven converted ironclads with all the Skaven bits stuck on it, and like KO just look phenomenal when you convert them. I think so. I mean, they look great to begin with, but when you convert them, I think they've got a lot of scope for some really cool stuff. Yeah. So
I was walking around the convention hall because it's a bunch of games being played. There was a 40k army that was just KO boats, and I looked closer. It was apparently some kind of orc army that was just using KO ironclads and frigate hulls as their trucks or whatever. So they were playing in the 40k event too. It's great.
Yeah, because KO are in that sort of steampunk vibe. They sort of sit in this place where you can sort of push them a bit more futuristic, or you can sort of drag them down a bit, and it sort of works in both directions. It's kind of nice. So you can kind of go either way with them. It's cool. Do you know there's a gallery of for Cancon anywhere where people can go and have a look at pictures and stuff?
There was a Facebook event page. I don't know if there's uploads. I did take a photo of all the coolest armies. I should probably upload them somewhere. I guess I'll see if they're not on the event page. I might send them to Jason and get him to upload them, perhaps. But there was definitely a Facebook event page, but it might have been one of the things that I guess got a bit left in the dust this time around. I'll give them some feedback for next year, more photos perhaps. But yeah, I'm not too sure how much photos ended up on the event page after.
I try to take as many photos as I can, like especially with my games. But my at the beginning I'll take like a photo after like every turn just to like look at the board state and everything. When I'm on the ride home or whatever. But this time, but my discipline with that kind of deteriorates over the course of the event. Especially by like the third game on the first day. I can't be bothered taking any photos, so. You might get like one in or something like that.
Yeah.
There was always lots of event photos at the start, and then it dropped off.
Yeah. I think most people are guilty of that. The first game is just like pictures of everything, and then it's like, it's just none. I don't know if it's worth asking this really based on what we've seen with the leaks, but I did this last week, a bit of speculation on the potential points changes to battle score and how we think that might affect your list. But I mean, if it is what we've seen, I don't know if it's going to affect your list at all, because Nathan, the Thunder's going up. I mean, you've got 30 points of swing there anyway with your 1970, so you'd lose your triumph.
I just lose triumph. Yeah. That's not the end of the world.
And Luca, I don't think your list has changed at all.
Oh, I don't run any Thunderers unless anything else is going up. Then I wouldn't.
I mean, it's just So, I mean, it's If they are the points, that your lists aren't going to change, and cons won't change either. So, I mean, I assume you guys are sort of happy with your lists, and you're not looking to tweak them going forwards, or. I mean, all that kind of depend on if there is major meta shifts or something.
I am having I'm having some second thoughts about Gotrek, just because the number of games where he doesn't like actually get into combat or do damage or eat things. There's quite a few games where he doesn't do that. But in those games, he is projecting power and he is like affecting the board state. Very much so. So whether that's worth a quarter of my army, though, is something I'm questioning. There's another version of my list where I drop Gotrek and the gunhauler, and I just take 10 Thunderers and a frigate. And I just do 10 Thunderers in a frigate, 9 Engine Riggers in a frigate, and just have 1 to fight, 1 to shoot. And, that might introduce a little, flexibility into my army. But then, I encounter the issues with concentrating my command points. Like I like to spend all my command points on the one package. And if I had 10 Thunderers, I might sort of dilute that a little bit. But I might keep an eye out for other allies as well. Like I feel like taking allies is sort of like adds a lot of potential to KO because there's some gaps in the army. Like if you ally in the Lumineth twins, for example, that might be a cheeky way of getting some extra spell casting in there, or if you ally in like some big tough self-sustaining unit, that might also help.
Ionis
I think those rumors had. I think those rumors had a Runefather and Magma dropping a lot of points. Yeah.
I can actually look at
you said something about Ionis as well, Alex?
Yeah, again, a max pick was Ionis as this big flying guy who can keep up with your boats, relatively tough, and can turn off battle shock immunity for your opponent. So you can shoot a little bit here, shoot a little bit there, shoot a little bit there, dump Ionis in the middle, and suddenly, like a Skaven or Gitz player would just watch half their army just vanish.
Yeah. I mean, he's not just shutting off that because, I mean, if he charges, he could roar as well, which, all of a sudden your Engine Riggers effectively it's like a -3 rend then if they're not using all our defense. So
it brings up what a monster brings, or you can smash a piece of terrain.
I think he turns off rally as well, which from a shooting army perspective is really good. Rally can really hurt if you don't wipe everything out with your shooting. So being able to turn that off alone is pretty potent.
Yeah. And I mean, you can always just run the Incarnate as well if you want like that 480 points that I would spend on Gotrek. I could just literally swap them out for an Incarnate, and it might do much the same job, if not a little faster. Maybe a little, and then take like an Arcane Tome instead or something like that, just for the +1 to cast. But I mean, I do like Gotrek because there's a lot of tech around him, and he's also just like such a fixed point on the field. Like he does so much damage when he gets into anything, and you don't have to put any command points into him. He's always going to get his damage through because he's re-rolling everything. And there's certain matchups like, against Gargants, for example, he just loves to eat Gargants for breakfast. Like I played a game against Kragnos and Brod, and he soloed them both. So he can he's the bee's knees in the right circumstance, and he's just a pet unit for me as well. Like
that big combat presence in the middle that you can just like your opponent has to respect and has to work around. And when they're working around him, you can just pick him off. It definitely fills one of those holes that KO has.
Yeah,
I think another good ally is the ever classic Knight Incanter. So my list, I also ran at an event a couple of months ago, which I managed to go 5-0, which I was just over the moon with. It was a local event, so I was like, But I knew the power flux was round 5, and I knew that there was definitely some Nurgle floating around. So I actually dropped the Navigator for a Knight Incanter, which meant that my Triumph bid wasn't particularly great, but I was able to switch it to Barak Urbaz, so I got that +1 to wound back anyway. Because I don't have the Navigator, I don't have the Voidstone Orb, but the Incanter brings that with him on his Wall Scroll anyway. So I was able to bring the Burst Grenade for turning off wards. So that sort of tweak to the list was quite interesting as well. And having just that little Mystic Shield up your sleeve, being able to go Mystic Shield on my Ironclad or Mystic Shield on the Thunderers makes them a little bit tankier, which is pretty great. Gives you another battle tactic potentially turn 1 as well. You can backboard the Incanter and go for that magical dominance. So that's in terms of list tweaks, maybe that. But I think with the points increases, you probably have to drop something else. I don't think that would fit in this list as well. But he's a good little ally to consider because I think having that little wizard there is, it's nice to have. Particularly if you've got power fights or something like that in a later round. He is, yeah.
Because if you think about it, he is basically 2 artifacts because he's Arcane Tome and Voidstone Orb in some ways. So,
and the other thing is his War Scroll spell is a -1 to charge bubble, which you don't hate as a KO player. You know, if you're making their charges a bit harder, that's not the worst thing in the world.
Yeah.
And there's no real risk to throwing some dice to get it to cast. You don't get it, you don't get it. But with Primal Dice, you might be able to force one through. So he's a nice little piece I don't mind putting into a KO list. But yeah. Otherwise, I am fairly happy with how the list plays. So we'll see how it goes. See what the Battle Scroll brings.
Yeah, I mean, if in theory, the Battle Scroll could change the meta completely. So I don't know if it will, but you know, if all of a sudden everyone's playing very different lists. Yeah, we were talking about it. It was only potentially this month. I mean, I think it will be this month. Yeah, they didn't even say like they didn't even just say later this month. Just the fact they said potentially is a bit worrying.
Yeah, we might be sort of stuck in this, you know, in this meta for a long time. But it seems like the game's in a good place, anyways, in my opinion. You know, like every time I hear like the On a Small Game, they call out the stats. There's a respectable sort of diversity of factions at the top. You know, you do see the similar archetypes again and again, but there's a lot of them, and so that's and sometimes you also see something kind of interesting squeak its way through as well. So, you know, like more or less, I think the game's in a pretty good spot competitively, nonetheless.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. So I think we've pretty much covered everything. So bring the show to an end. Thank you guys for coming on. It's been a pleasure to have you. Krohn, always a pleasure, of course. Thank you very much, and thank you to everyone that's watching live and watching in the future. Not live. Yeah. Thanks, everyone. And we'll see you again soon, Skyfarers. Goodbye.
See ya.
Thanks for having me.